Thank you. All right, so you guys are in AM Breakout B risk stratification. I want to say hello to all of you. Thank you for attending this session. I know we're very spread out, but it looks like we have a great group here today. I also want to say hello to our viewers that couldn't attend today that are attending via live stream. Please feel free to ask questions in chat, and we'll make sure they answered as we go along here. My name is Iona Bergiori, and I am a New Jersey practice facilitator. Some of you may know me, some of you may not. I will be the moderator for this session, and the format of this session is a workshop. So I'll be talking for a little while, and then it will be mostly you all working on process mapping. So this workshop is designed to help your practice improve and refine your risk stratification and empanelment processes this year in 3 different ways. First off, identifying, being able to use a process map to design your risk stratification process and role-based workflows. And identifying and recognize those significant triggers that are used to reevaluate patients' risk scores, as well as being able to use your practice feedback reports and your payer reports to identify patients that may have unaddressed complex needs requiring additional episodic or longitudinal care management. So here we can see the driver diagram. We should all be super familiar with this diagram at this point. Risk stratification really plays a huge role in the work you do to care for your patient population, and it's a big focus in Function 2 care management. Risk stratification really allows your practices to identify strategies to address those patients at high risk or rising risk and assign them to care management if necessary, as well as meeting the needs of your patients at low risk in order to optimize patient care and improve patient outcomes. So here we have a little pie chart. This data is based off of the Q4 2017 New Jersey Regional Feedback Report. So this data is up to the end of Q3 last year. So here we can see that both Track 1 and Track 2 practices are represented, and only 62% of both tracks reported that they were risk stratifying 95% or more of their impaneled patients. So just as far as noting the reports, please always be sure to review the New Jersey regional reports. They can be found on CPC Plus Connect in the New Jersey Regional Practice Group. And please be sure to download your practice feedback reports that can be found on the CPC Plus portal. Okay, so here we can see the 2018 care delivery requirements for care management for Track 1 practices. So in 2017, Track 1 practices were asked to risk stratify all their patients, whether they were using a 1 or 2-step practice. For this year, Track 1 practices are asked to risk stratify using a 2-step process. So really using this 2-step approach, it goes beyond just using the algorithm and taking into account the clinical perception for each specific patient, making sure that you're addressing those medical needs, those behavioral diagnoses, and health-related social needs. So the first step will need to include using that algorithm, and you want to make sure it's based off those defined diagnoses, those claims, the other electronic data, allowing for that population-level stratification. So this is something you may or may have not had a discussion with your vendor about. So some EHRs have that risk stratification piece incorporated into the EHR and automatically score the patients. Other EHRs, you have to work with them to get that algorithm implemented, and so that you can ask the risk score yourself. Or if your EHR vendor doesn't allow you to do this, you want to make sure that there's a field built into your EHR that's reportable where you can assign a risk score to those patients. So if this is a conversation you haven't started with your vendor, it may be time to start thinking about this and exploring your options. So from there, you want to add that clinical perception after those risk scores are assigned via the algorithm. So from there, you can adjust the risk score as needed, and you can enroll your patients in longitudinal or episodic care management. The care team perception, or the clinical perception, really just takes into account those things that aren't incorporated into the algorithm that you may know about the patient that you may feel adjust their risk score and making it more accurate and up to date. All right, so here I have the same requirements for Track 2 practices. As we know, it's the same 2-step risk stratification process, but additionally, you want to make sure as a Track 2 practice that you're incorporating those plans of care for those patients enrolled in longitudinal care management. And you want to make sure that these care plans have the goals and needs and self-management activities that these patients are participating in included, and that you're routinely accessing and updating these care plans. Excuse me. Okay, so just moving on to some basic definitions of terms here. We're all familiar, but empanelment is that list of patients assigned to the practitioner or care team, while risk stratification is that tool for identifying and predicting those patients that are at increased risk. Longitudinal care management is that targeted, proactive, relationship-based care management for those patients at high risk, while episodic care management is that short-term care management based on event triggers. And we'll dig into some event triggers here shortly. So digging into two-step risk stratification, this really increases the opportunity of identifying the highest risk patients for care management that may have been missed otherwise if you weren't using or if you were just using an algorithm, or if you weren't using a risk stratification process at all. So first step is choosing your algorithm, deciding if your EHR already has it incorporated or if you have to choose that algorithm yourself, and making sure this algorithm is taking into account, like I said, that historical data, like utilization, EHR, and claims data. Your second step is to add that clinical intuition and care team perception piece. So once those patients are assigned the score by the algorithm, then the risk assessments can be compared with the information from the clinician or the care team about the patient to accurately assign and adjust that risk score. Okay, so once you have that algorithm and that clinical perception piece in place, you want to make sure that you're continuously risk stratifying your patients. This is really important to make sure that their score is up to date and reflecting their care and how they're feeling. So some common triggers for reevaluation are listed here. We've talked about these in other sessions. ED and hospital admissions, medication changes, any new diagnoses, transitions to a new setting of care, and just transitions of care. So how can we use data to identify those patients with complex needs requiring care management? So you can use your practice feedback reports on the CPC Plus portal or your other payer data feedback reports, even population health registries, to identify those patients that may have high inpatient expenditures, high outpatient expenditures, a high number of ED visits observed, high specialty expenditures, and those ambulatory care sensitive condition discharges observed. So really by identifying these high utilizers, your practice can find those who may need episodic or longitudinal care management that they may have missed. Your practice may also discover other needs related to social factors, behavioral health, or end-of-life care when they're doing their care planning. All right, to start out simple, process mapping and defining the process and the process map. So that process is a set of activities or steps that achieves the result, whereas the process map is a visual representation of that process to help your team better understand its roles and tasks and to highlight any opportunities for improvement. So process mapping becomes extremely valuable when your practice needs to define and refine their empanelment and risk stratification processes through this visual representation. So I always say some of the best type of process mapping is starting with sticky notes, because you're able to document each step and hang it up wherever you want, and determine which steps really add and subtract value from your process. So you can just easily remove them or add additional ones and go from there. So why do we do process mapping? So by documenting the current state and how things are currently done, you establish that baseline for how your workflows are currently operating, and it really helps you identify those areas for improvement. From there, you have the opportunity to create a more efficient and meaningful way to empanel and risk stratify your patients. So just from a high level, you can see here the different steps that lead to process map outcomes. So by sharing the current steps in your process, whether it be with sticky notes, using a whiteboard, swim lane diagrams, et cetera, you can really determine the different handoffs that occur between those involved in the process. and identify any areas for improvement, whether it be cutting steps or expanding upon steps that are crucial to the process. And then identifying any personnel responsible for these tasks and that are going to be responsible for optimizing this step in the process. Okay, leaning into some process mapping tips here. So it's really important to define the scope of the process you're going to be working on. Don't map just for the sake of mapping. The goal is to improve. So you want to define the scope with your practice. Why is it necessary? What do I want to find out? And for encouragement, it may be good to start with a small process that has a high likelihood of success, so your team is encouraged to build upon some bigger processes that need more improvement. So then you want to move into engagement, and selecting those participants involve everyone that's affected by the process and communicate the process and benefits of process mapping without creating anxiety, because this can be like a very big deal to some smaller practices that aren't used to such a formal process. So from there, you want to go on to documenting the current state and focus on documenting the process as it currently is, and pushing past those standard operating procedures and incorporating even those workarounds and loopholes that aren't so formalized in the practice. So make sure you can measure that outcome of your process with data to ensure improvement is seen once changes are made to that process as well. So the current state analysis. So like I said, that visual representation, that flow chart or process map is a visual representation of the sequence of steps. And it really leads to that understanding of the process as it currently operates. And this is an important step to developing ideas about how to improve it. So this makes process maps really useful in the early stages of improvement because they allow you to see your workflows as how they are. So your practice can approach process mapping with the more commonly used method of the paper on the wall approach. You can use a whiteboard and sticky notes and lay out the existing process and also think about the ideal process. So this will really help you to identify any gaps or strengths or opportunities by thinking about how you would like the process to be. This really makes it simple to incorporate quality improvement tools like PDSAs, and test those solutions thoroughly to make sure they are optimizing your workflow. All right, so this slide's important because it really is incorporated into our workshop today. So flow charting to map your process. So you first want to start out with defining your start and end points. Those usually are shaped like circles, so we'll be using sticky notes today, and you can just fold down the corners so it looks more like a circle. From there, you want to work on writing each task, activity, or step in the process, one per sticky note, and those are usually just the regular sticky note. And from there, you also want to think about your decisions in the process, even those triggers for reevaluation of our score. Those are usually shaped like diamonds, and those usually break off into different workflows sometimes, depending on what decision you make in the process. So you can either turn your sticky note on the side, so it's shaped like a diamond, or fold it to look like a diamond. And step 4 uses lines to show connections. So after you've established the start, the end, the steps, the decision points, that's when you want to draw your connectors. All right, so then you want to apply that visual management to that process map. So you could color code different staff members or roles or different components of a single process. We have an example here, pink for care manager. You want to distinguish those steps as well, so you could do the same thing with facts, opinions, or assumptions, and you could color code those as well. And then, like I said, it's very important that you have all your steps defined before you draw your connectors to prevent you from having to scribble and just retool things once those connectors are already established. And then make sure you're marking any areas that you feel like they may need improvement. You can even use a different color or shape for these areas. All right. So walking through the process, what happens at each step? Think about who does the work, how long does each step take, how much does the success of this process rely on this step, and identify any waste, problems, or delays. All right, so this is a little much to look at, but I had the pleasure of working with Dr. Alexander Biener's practice in Woodcliff Lake on mapping their two-step risk stratification process. This practice is on eClinicalWorks, and their EHR automatically assigns a risk score based on answers from the patient's health risk assessment. So you can see here that there's discrete fields built into the EHR for evaluating and documenting that score. But like I was talking about, there's different shapes here. So you can see the yellow on the left is used to establish a predefined process, whereas the orange boxes are used to define steps, and the blue ones below them are used to define documented processes. Then you can also see the diamond all the way on the right. That's a decision point. And from there, broken off, you can see the endpoints or circles. And I'll keep this up during our workshop so you guys can all refer to it as well. All right, so documenting the current state, some simple steps here. Get the right people in the room, those who know the process best, deal with it on a day-to-day basis. And start by defining the first and last steps in the process so everyone has a shared understanding of where the process you're working on starts and ends. And from there, you can plug in those sticky notes with the steps in the process. You want to review that flow chart for accuracy and completeness. Make sure you're including every small step. That's why it's important to have the right people in the room who are dealing with any of those loops or workarounds outside the standard operating procedures. And assign action items to any team members to fill in unfamiliar steps and verify accuracy. And after that process map, that process is established, you've established that baseline, you've reviewed it with the right people, you want to identify any problems or bottlenecks. Start focusing on the delays, unnecessary work, duplication, communication breakdown, asking questions like, are these steps necessary? Which steps can be improved upon to be more efficient? Why are we doing this? What can we do different to improve efficiency? Who can or should be doing this part of the process? And would protocols or standing orders help? So once these steps are identified that don't add value to the improvement of your work, you can begin to workshop on action plans to be developed to address these improvements. So a team review, final step here. Make sure you post that final process map in a visible location so team members who did not participate in the mapping can provide any feedback. And just continue to analyze, review, and keep the process map up to date at all times. All right, so jumping into the workshop here, you guys have plenty of time to work on this. What I'd like you all to do, you have sticky notes, you have notepads, pens at your table. I'd like you to work on mapping out your empanelment and risk stratification processes, especially for those practices that haven't achieved 100% empanelment. This is something to focus on as we're in year 2 here. And consider points for empanelment, like how is the patient assigned to a care team or practitioner? Is it based off who the patient saw last, who they saw most? How can we optimize this so that the patient's preference is recorded? Is it best to ask upon the time of visit? Things like that. And also don't forget to include those triggers that you use to reevaluate risk score. All right, so I'm going to hand it off to you guys to get started on the workshop, and then once we get a little closer to time, we'll start sharing some of them with the group. And if anyone on the webcast has any questions, please feel free to push them to chat. Okay, everyone, we got a few minutes left here, so I want to make sure we're able to share a few examples before we finish up and take any questions. All right, so I know Kelly is all the way to the left of me. Let me see. Can you give the mic to Kelly over there, if possible? Thank you. Thanks, Kelly.
Welcome. So we're part of a large organization, so risk stratification is not done at the practice level. It's actually done on a much higher level. So we have an ACO department, and they basically capture all of the risk scores for the patients. This is collected through the payers and through another calculation that they have. So once they stratify the patient into low, medium, or high, those ACO teams, they reach out to the patient and they start to coordinate their longitudinal care management, which is then given back down to the provider, and we're all connected through the same EHR. So we see everything that the patient is going to, whether it's another specialist or to another program that that patient needs in order to help their risk score decrease.
Yeah, and I think that's a great approach to having that centralized care team and making sure that everyone's involved in what the care team is communicating with the patient. So thank you for sharing. All right, can I please have one more practice or group that'd like to share their risk stratification or empanelment process? Anyone? I'm gonna pick you. How about you guys, please? There's a mic right behind you. She is a very good talker.
Okay. Oh, that's really loud. So we're from Shore Physicians Group in Summers Point, so we're about an hour, 45 minutes away. But our risk stratification process has been very bumpy. So what we do is we have created our very own algorithm that we have based off of the AAFP tool, and we take actual numbers from the patient's charts, put it into an algorithm, we get a risk stratification number or a risk score number, and then the care coordinator team, there's 4 of us, manually input those numbers into the patient's charts. That would be our step 1. Step 2 is a little bit harder for us, as some of you might know. Providers sometimes can be a little bit more difficult, and this would be a little bit different, where it's the clinical intuition, and we're doing a step 1 through 4. So they're supposed to be putting it onto our quality tab, so it can be a little difficult. Some people don't really want to do it, but it has been a very good work in progress. I think that's about it. We use Athena. Anybody else use Athena?
Yes.
Oh, we have buddies. Do you guys have any issues with Athena? So do we. So I'm guessing you guys can only use the quality tab during an open encounter. Are you guys having issues with your providers with that? We are. Step 1 is going in social history because we can pull a report from that. Step 2 is where the provider actually has to go into. It might have been Tracy. Yeah.
Great. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, and just so a reminder here, during lunch, we're going to be having a working lunch talking about different vendors, issues, successes with them, so feel free to join in on that in the discussion. For the sake of time here, we have about 2 minutes left, so does anyone have any questions, any takeaways from today's workshop? All right, so just to mention, we do have tons of information about process mapping, so please be sure to log on to CPC Plus Connect, and these slides will be posted there. The rest of today's slides will be posted there. Let me progress on here. Okay, and just a commitment to action, a piece to take away. Are you prepared to build an empanelment and 2-step risk stratification process map once you get back to your practice that'll help you to achieve 100% empanelment and 100% risk stratification, starting next week or in the near future? All right, so if I could just get a quick show of hands for those of you that are able to apply ideas you learned today to your practice. If you strongly agree, if you could raise your hand. All right, if you just agree, could you raise your hand? Great. Neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Okay. And those of you on our webcast as well, please feel free to share how you feel about today's workshop. And just keep the conversation going. Like I said, make sure you engage on CPC Plus Connect. Look in group files under the New Jersey Regional Practice Group, and you'll be able to find all the resources from today's session as well as others. Thank you all. Thanks for your help. I needed you in here, so thank you.